Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about fasteners like rivets, snaps, things like that, where you're trying to fasten two pieces of leather together, maybe permanently, maybe not permanently, but maybe it's an area where sewing's not going to work. You're going to have something a little stouter, or you just want something that's a little faster. We're going to need some different types of setters for a lot of these things. Different snaps in particular, you've got to have the right anvils for those. And so we're going to go through just some of the stuff that I use in my shop. This isn't by any means all of them, it's just the ones that I commonly use, and I'll show you kind of what we do with those and when we use those. Okay, so here on this bench you can kind of see I've got a kind of just a little medley here of all kinds of different little types of fasteners and things like that. The first thing I want to say is you're going to need some type of anvil. So you're going to need something, we may have talked about this in another video, you're going to need some type of big plate, something like that, that you can set your rivets on. This is just a drop-off piece of steel that we've had for years and years and years in the shop, and it works great. This is a chunk of aluminum, works great as well. It's a little bit lighter, but still has enough weight to be able to set what we need. You're also, a good thing to have would be a ball peen hammer. Sometimes that is handy for particularly rivets and different things like that. You need also a mallet that you can use, either a rawhide mallet like this, or even a heavier maul. This is a heavier Barry King maul that I use quite often, because you don't want to damage your setters or the tools that you're using to set. Then you're also going to want, particularly for brass rivets and copper rivets, you're going to want a good set of cutters. I happen to just have an old pair of horse nippers here, hoof nippers, and they work really, really well, particularly on the heavy brass rivets. Brass is going to be a lot harder than copper, but any kind of end cutters would work perfectly for that. And then of course you're going to need to be able to make a hole for the size fastener that you're using. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but I usually keep in this drawer down here in this bench, I will keep a number 2 and a number 5, and that'll usually cover you on all of those. And then as far as the different types of fasteners, the most common one that I use in the shop every day is just going to be a simple copper rivet. Now I buy 2 different sizes usually. I buy the 3/4 inch size as well as the 1 inch. The 1 inch are usually on saddles, areas on saddles where I need that length of the rivet because of the material thickness, so the 3/4 ones won't work. So, but the thing to remember with copper and brass rivets when you're buying those by the pound. So if you're cutting off most of the 1 inch ones pretty frequently, buy the smaller ones, because you don't need that length in your projects, and you're going to get more rivets per pound. So they are sold by the pound. And then just we'll go through the setters and stuff when we start doing those. These are this little deal here. This kit has a lot of Claudia stuff for bags and things like that. And I carry 2 different size brass rivets in there for her. The brass rivets are going to be much harder than the copper rivets, so you'll find those are a little bit more difficult to cut, and they're more difficult to dome, but they're a nice pretty rivet. But I carry 2 sizes in those, and I think it's a number 9, and then I can't remember what the narrower one was, or the smaller diameter, but it's a lighter rivet there. And I carry those 2 different sizes just because sometimes you don't need that big rivet, you need a smaller one, but there's a couple different sizes of those available. And then as far as snaps, the most common snap that I use in saddle work is going to be the line 24. We also will use a line 20, which is just a little smaller version of the 24. Basically the exact same snap, just smaller. So those work out great on different things, cuffs, different stuff like that. If you're making, decorative kind of watch band stuff, anything like that, they're not too bulky. And then we also will use, and I don't have a ton, I've got these bins full of pieces, but we need to order some belt snaps. For years I've used these I think they're called Sigma snaps, and I don't have the other end. I've got these here. So I had to hunt down, I'm missing only one piece really of these little silver ones, but you've got a male end there that has the little button, or not the button, but the little stub, and then these 2 here, these 2 bigger ones, that's your button, and then that's your female side. These are what typically are used in belts. Most of your belts on the rack, and most belt makers will use this type of snap. They work great, as we'll get to in a minute. You got to be careful with the thickness of your material. I've since gone to just using Chicago screws. I quit using Chicago screws years ago because the customer was usually complaining that they had to get a screwdriver to change their belt buckles out if they wanted to change them. And so we went to snaps just for that reason, but I prefer Chicago screws because they're going to hold a lot better. These little snaps do wear out and they get loose and they don't snap as well. So that's for our belts. And then another fastening type deal, and these come in all finishes, all shapes, all sizes, and these are your speed rivets. These are double cap speed rivets, and they have a post and then they have just a little cap. Both sides are pretty. Both sides have a nice domed little head on them. And so double cap speed rivets are very popular for really small projects, you know, anything like that. They're more than enough. If you've ever tried to remove one of these when you needed to take it off, then you're fully aware that they don't just fall out. You've got to really fight to get them out. They do set really well. They come in different sizes as far as length goes, and then tons of different finishes. I get all these at Weaver Leather Supply, so you can pick all kinds of finishes up on those. I think I've got 3 or 4 different finishes on these. Very helpful, and like I said, different sizes. I will usually carry the 3/8. These are 3/8 long. They will do a lot of work, even pretty stout little leather projects they'll do. And then I also carry the 1/4 inch, which is a little smaller, because if you put a too big a one and you don't have enough material, it'll just bend over. It's not going to set flat, as you'll see in a minute if we when we explain that. But so let's set some of these. We'll go ahead and start with the little speed rivet because that's the easiest one to set. That's what a lot of people use. And I've just got some scrap leather here. We're just gonna set some of these and I'm gonna kind of show y'all that. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna use a number 2 hole because these are pretty small diameter. They're not very big. You could even use a number 1, would work just fine. You just don't want too big of a hole where the head could possibly slip through there. And so these are real simple, guys. You just put the post in. It's gonna be a little long for this material. And we're gonna put our cap on there. Now you see how far that's sticking up? That's too much, and I'll show you why. As we go through here and set this, now as far as the setter to use, this is a very old, and for years and years, I've had this thing since my first handy kit, and when I was young and first in college and things, I didn't really think about it, and I was hitting it with a metal hammer, so it's domed that around. We need to grind that off, but it's kind of just part of the shop now. But it's got a concaved area right in here. That's for that cap. Now, if you want, you can also put, if you're trying to keep both sides really pretty, usually I'll just set it flat on here and set it. But you can certainly get one of these. Will come with this snap setter stuff, and you will have a concaved little anvil that you can set that on, and then you can come here and just drive that down. Now that drove pretty straight. It's hard to see in the video, but where the bottom is, where the top is, they're actually in line. This rivet here was too long for this material thickness wise, and so usually they'll shift apart, they'll shift over, so they won't be right on top of each other. So that's when you want to step down and use your smaller rivets. So here is the smaller ones. As you can see, they're much shorter than these, okay? And so that's the ones we would want to use on this thickness of material right here, because it's going to set more properly because it is more closer to the right thickness. That's the only trick with the speed rivets, or the double cap ones especially. And you just push that down and that sets that. So the shorter one's going to work just a little bit better. But that's really it with speed rivets. Now they do make what's called a splash rivet. That's a different thing. I think you've got to have kind of the setter for that, and it actually splits the rivet as it sets it and crimps it down. It's pretty unsightly on the back side, but you'll see that in a lot of manufactured products. They'll use a lot of splash rivets, split rivets, things like that. I don't particularly like those. If I'm going to use a cheaper like speed rivet like this, it's going to be a double cap. And then as far as snaps, we'll go ahead and set some snaps right quick, and I'm going to show you. So like I said, I've got just one little set here. I can find more, but I'm not using these quite a bit or too much anymore. But these are the things you'll need for setting the Sigma snaps, these type of belt snaps. And Tandy used to sell this kit. This here was came in a whole kit. It's got other little, for different size snaps, it's got other little posts, but you'll see this guy here has a little nipple on there, and that fits perfectly into the female side of the snap. So when we set it, it doesn't distort it. And then of course, the one we just used, the little concave driver, you'll have that. And then you've got this little guy here, this bar. Of course, you've seen this little anvil here, there's a concave. It's for the button. And this little bar here has two different size holes. It also has a little concave dome there. But this little male button sits right down in there. And that's going to also maintain that shape as we set the snap. It's not going to distort the nipple here so that it can actually merge with the button side. Now they used to sell this all in a box. I'm assuming they still do, but you'll need this setter to be able to set these snaps. So if we come here and we'll just set one. I'm gonna go ahead. I use a number 5 for the female side, which is your bigger post, okay? A bigger post like that, and we'll push that in there. The thing you want to be sure about is that when you set these, that you've got a little bit sticking out of your material on that female side there, because if you don't have that, the button's not going to set. So we want to be sure and have that. We'll use our round anvil there. There's our button. You can see kind of how that looks. And what we want to do is we're going to set that in the anvil, take the piece that's sticking out, put it down in the button just like that, take our setter with our little nipple on there, and then we will push that down in there, okay? And now we're just going to hold that down. And you don't want to beat it up, but you want to set it well. Now that snap doesn't look really set around the edge. So I like to go until I get it crimped, because these do come off. They're notorious for popping off. And it's one reason why I kind of quit using them, because it's kind of difficult to get them to set really tight, especially on thicker material. So now you can see that set. There's our buttons on there. And so now I'll just take this for now. We'll use a number 2 on this side. So now we take this little post. We're going to put that up or down, whichever way you're setting the snap, whatever way you got to have it work, right? And then we'll put that little male side down in that hole. Take this post, put it down there, concave setter here, and that sets that. So now that little post is on there nice and tight. And so now we'll take, and I like to obviously make sure they work. Okay. And if you have the setter, it makes it really easy. The biggest drawback to these is going to be the thickness of the material. So if you're building a belt and using these on belts, you're going to have to be sure to skive down your bend areas where it's going over the buckle, and be sure you have kind of a range that you know it needs to be at, because there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a belt and you can't get the snaps to set because your belt's too thick. So be sure and do that. So that's setting those, and that's all these tools are really good for, is setting those snaps. Now you will use these 2 tools on other things, like I said, the speed rivets, or we'll also use this little anvil right here for the line 24 snaps right now. So now we'll take the line 24 snaps. They're kind of the same thing, just a little different. You've got your female side or your male side right there. It's going to be the back side of this one does not look very attractive. It's just got a hole in it, pretty simple. And then you've got your deal there. Got our button side here, which is the pretty side, right? That's going to be the button. And then you've got your female part here that's got a little wire in there, almost like a little bead in there, and that's what makes it snap on the male side. And so we'll need all 4 of those. And so what I'll normally do on those is I use a number 5 because they're bigger. So we'll punch a hole there. We'll do the button side first. We're going to put the button down, right, whichever way we need it. And then we'll set that button down in that little anvil. And now we'll put the catch on there. Now you can swap these and the snap will work. So you could put this one on there if you needed to for some reason. You can definitely do that. This is how I set them all the time though. I think this is the proper way to set them, or the way they're supposed to be set. The other tool that I would recommend getting, you don't have to have it, but you got to have something with a little nub like this, and they have a couple different setters, but the best one I have found in 20-something years is this one that Barry King came up with, and it's got a bigger hole there. That's for the button, that female part of the button, and then on the other side it's got a smaller hole bored out there, and that is for the male side. Fits right up inside there. So he makes one for the 24s, makes one for the 20s, and then you have your driver that goes right in there, and it keeps the driver straight. So, and you can hold this barrel, push down, and then just drive the driver through the barrel of this, and that's really going to help to set these snaps evenly and get them straight, because sometimes you can fight it. So we'll drop that down in there. Again, you don't have to beat it up, you just want it tight. You don't want that piece of the snap to be dancing around on there. You want it nice and snug. And you can see that little anvil maintained our button here. We didn't mar it up or flatten it out. And so now we'll come over here and we'll set this side. You go up or down, whatever you need for your project. Then we put that side on. And now we'll flip this guy around to the smaller hole. Put that on there. And then drive that down. And we'll make sure it's tight as well. So now we've got both of those snaps done. Test them. Pretty secure snap. These are very good snaps. These usually will not wear out. They will not pop off. They're usually really good. And but they're big. So if you're trying to make a belt, that's too big of a snap for your bend area in your belt, in my opinion. Now you could step down and use the 20s, but I still think they're too big for a belt. But that's a size 20 there, so you can see the difference. But they set exactly the same way. Only difference is you need the different size setter. So Barry, like I said, he makes one for each. I would buy them both, because at some point you probably will want to use these type of snaps somewhere in your projects. So I would definitely get both of those. Very good setter. I haven't found one that's any better. This is the best setter for that snap. And that's all it does, but it's super handy. Okay, then as we get to rivets, we're just going to set a 3/4 inch rivet. But your rivets come, most of you are probably familiar with these. With copper rivets, you've got your actual rivet, and then you've got a copper burr, okay? They're pretty straightforward, but all we do on those is I'll use a number 5, on these number 9 rivets, I use a number 5 hole, and punch our hole wherever we're needing our rivet. And we'll go down usually, if I'm building tack or saddle stuff outside of riggings, I usually point them down towards the horse on rigging, because I want that domed area to look nice on the outside of the saddle, and sheepskins covering those rivets, so it's not an issue. But on headstalls and things like that, we will always face our rivets away from the horse. So the burr's on the outside. It's not the most attractive, but I don't like the burr facing the horse. It's just kind of an etiquette thing for me. But if we're building anything else, you always will want to see the head of your rivet and not the burr. So we're going to set that there, and then we're going to put our burr on the end of our rivet there. And then we're going to use these setters. These setters here, this is the common setter that most people use. Okay, this is just a CS Osborne setter. It's old. It's got a peening area here where you can peen your cutoff, and then you've got the hole there to drive the burr down with. These aren't very good. They're they work. You can use them. They're utilitarian. They function, but they're kind of frustrating sometimes. And so I found these through Maker's Leather Supply. These are really nice. I've seen styles of these before, and there's a few other different versions out there, but these work really great. And they've got a line on them, 1, 2, and 3. So this one here is your hole first. So that's what we use to drive the burr down. Number 2 is your peen. So that is what we're going to use to peen the nub that sticks out after we cut the rivet off. And then the third one is your domer. And so we'll go through those right quick. So we'll take the whole side there, and we're just going to drive that burr down to where it's tight. Okay, and you want it nice and snug. You don't want it loose on there. And then we'll take whatever we're using. I'm using hoof nippers, but you can use end cutters, whatever you got. And you cut that excess rivet off, how much ever sticking out. You cut it off and leave yourself about 1/8 of an inch, somewhere around there. That's all you need. You just need enough to peen this over, okay? So now we'll take that tool, the peening tool, and as we hit, we're gonna actually, I like to twist this in my fingers, just and all that's gonna do is mushroom that end right there so that the burr can't come off. And you wanna kinda do that until it's smooth. So if this is gonna have a chance of touching, maybe it's inside a purse and maybe somebody's hand's gonna be in there, you don't wanna leave a burr. I always kind of give them a little feel. Make sure I don't have any burrs. You can take a ball peen hammer then at that point and just real lightly shape that. You can shape that copper up and make sure it's nice and smooth. Again, if it's facing a horse, I will point that out because you can feel a little bit there, and you can cut that a little bit shorter if you want, but if you cut it too short, you're not going to get enough peen on it to be able to make sure the burr's not going to pop off. So you want to leave enough to be able to do that. So my suggestion is usually to line over that so nobody can accidentally cut themselves. It's not going to cut you bad. But biggest thing is on rivets, do not beat this with a ball peen hammer or your peening tool so hard that you begin to cup that burr. Just in my mind and the way I was taught when I was doing my apprenticeship, if you cup that burr, you've already started it to be able to pull through the leather. So now it's beveled on the bottom side, so there's more of a chance for that rivet to be pulled out, right? Particularly on riggings is what we're talking about and things like that. So you want to be sure that you're not cupping that burr. I like that burr to stay completely flat. And then we'll take our domer on the pretty side, and all we're going to do is just dome the head of that rivet. And that further clinches down your peen on this side, compresses the material, make sure that rivet is completely tight. So it's not just for looks. It actually is compressing that rivet and making this domed like that instead of being cupped here, right? So you're actually getting a little more secure fastening there when you do that. But it also makes that rivet look much more attractive. Now, we can also do this with a brass rivet, and I'm going to just show you it's the exact same process, but the brass is considerably harder, just a harder material. So if we come over here and we get a nice brass rivet, same size, I'm going to set that in there. They're much prettier, much more attractive than the copper. That's why Claudia likes to use them on her bags. She doesn't like my copper rivets. Then we'll take the same setters. These setters are for certain size rivets, so these are for number 9s. We have another set for these thinner ones, these thinner rivets here, and I got a whole different set for that. And so that set is only for those size rivets there. So burr goes down easy enough. Now we'll cut off our excess. You can see how much of that rivet I'm wasting. Okay, so that's why you want to buy the length that you use the most. Don't just buy the longest ones because you're not getting very many. You're not getting near as many as you would in a pound if you were buying the shorter ones. So if you're cutting this much off, this is for demonstration, but if you're cutting this much off every day, buy smaller rivets. Because you can see how much harder that was to cut off. That brass is much harder. And then we'll take our number 2 here, the peen side, and we're going to peen that over. Okay, and now we'll flip that over, and now we're going to dome it with the dome inside. And now I gave it about the same licks that I did on this one, I believe, but you can see how we didn't get quite as much doming on that. You've really got to whoop on it because that brass is so hard, but it looks so much better. It's smooth. It's not, we don't see a bunch of the copper on there. Now you can take these copper rivets and buff them off and make them really shine and really pretty. It's just an extra step. The brass ones are really pretty, but they are super strong and really stout. So they're definitely an option to use. That's pretty much all the different fasteners I believe that we use here in the shop, but I want to mention one little tip here. See, this can is full of just rivet clippings and old rivets that we've knocked out of repairs. I save those too. That's solid copper. You have a separate bucket, but what I do is I take these little clippings that I take off the rivets, and we used to in the shop, every bench had a bucket like this, just a little coffee bucket there, and you would throw those rivet ends. If you can think about it, and you're not, you know, don't have to waste time picking them all up off the floor, but try to just chunk them in there, and you would be surprised how much one of these full of copper ends and old copper rivets would be worth at the scrap iron. It's solid copper. So I was shocked whenever we moved out of that shop, the original shop. I had 3 or 4 of these completely full, and I had a whole 16-foot flatbed full of scrap iron too, and I got far more out of those little buckets of copper than I did that entire trailer of scrap iron. So just something to think about. So you're buying it, you might as well get your money back on what you're not using. So I save all the ends if I can. If I think about it, I'll throw them in there, and once it gets full, we'll take it in. So that's just kind of a little tip. All right, guys, so that's just some of the fasteners that we use. There's a ton of different options out there. There's a lot of different people that make different styles. You can even get some of these rivets made with your own logo on them and things like that. There's a couple people I follow that have, not necessarily the rivets maybe, but the snaps. They'll have the snap buttons with their own little emblem on there, their little logo or whatever, and I think that's really cool. There's a lot of options out there for that. As a saddle maker, copper rivets have been kind of my go-to on everything. It's pretty utilitarian, but they're strong and they hold up. You can also use Chicago screws, and they're pretty self-explanatory. You punch a hole and they screw together. The thing I don't like about those, and horse tack in particular, I try my best not to use those anywhere, is because they do come off. They will rattle loose. You can put a little bit of nail polish in there, and I think it's, yeah, just clear nail polish, or you can use, I've actually used a little drop of contact cement in there when you screw them together. That way you can get them back off, but I just don't trust them. So I will usually either rivet whatever I'm doing on a headstall or whatever we're, you know, tug straps, anything like that. I will rivet those on, or I will use a bleed knot, like just a piece of lace, and lace that up somehow. I'd rather have something a little bit more secure than a Chicago screw. But on belts, Chicago screws are way better than those belt snaps. But I just wanted to go through and kind of show you some of the fasteners, more common ones that I use here in the shop. It's a lot of options out there. And yes, you usually want to try to coordinate your fasteners with your hardware. So that's why we have now a kit here that has the same brass finish of rivets, buckles, snaps, all those things, D-rings, the way it all matches. Because I never was a purse maker or bag maker, but we're getting more into that with Claudia being interested in it. And so evidently all those have to coordinate, and the copper rivet isn't gonna fly if everything else is brass. So keep that in mind. And popular question is, do they make a stainless steel rivet? Not to my knowledge. Stainless is so hard, I'm not sure you could set a rivet out of stainless, but if you know that there's a stainless rivet out there or some other type of rivet like these copper rivets, comment down below so everybody knows, because I've had that question a lot on is there anything else other than brass or copper? To my knowledge, there isn't, but you know, there's got to be something else out there. So if you know something, comment down below so we can all hear about it. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.